9 people are dead, 3 of them were children, siblings, a 16-year-old brother, and his 2 younger sisters, 13 and 15 years old, all killed in the same moment, in the same place, doing the exact same thing every Israeli is told to do when the sirens go off. They ran to the shelter, they went underground, they waited for it to be over, and an Iranian missile found them there anyway. This is the deadliest single strike on Israeli civilians since this war began, and it has cracked open a question that no government official, no military commander, and no civil defense expert can fully answer. If a reinforced bomb shelter underneath a synagogue cannot protect you, if a structure built to code, built for exactly this scenario, can be turned into a mass grave by one missile, then where exactly are you supposed to go? By the time you finish watching this video, you are going to understand exactly what happened in Beit Shemesh on March 1st, 2026. You are going to understand why the Arrow system, Israel's most capable ballistic missile interceptor, was never even deployed against the missile that killed 9 people. You are going to understand what Iran's cluster bomb strategy is doing to Israel's entire air defense architecture. And you are going to understand why the next 10 days may be the most important 10 days of this entire war, and what you should be watching for to know which direction this is heading. On the morning of February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched one of the most consequential military operations in modern history. In a coordinated strike, U.S. and Israeli forces hit Iran's military infrastructure, nuclear command structure, and leadership compounds simultaneously. And by the end of that day, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was dead. Iranian state broadcaster IRIB confirmed his death. Israeli officials said his remains had been located. Trump posted on Truth Social to declare the operation a success. And within hours, Iran had launched the most intense missile and drone campaign it has ever mounted, targeting not just Israel, but Gulf states hosting American military bases, civilian airports across the region, and residential neighborhoods in cities that had nothing to do with any of it. The Iran-Israel War of 2026 had officially begun. And it began with a ferocity that surprised even military analysts who had been wargaming this scenario for years. Beit Shemesh is not a military city. It is not a strategic target. It is a quiet, largely religious Jewish residential community about 30 kilometers west of Jerusalem. Apartment buildings, schools, families, synagogues. The kind of city where people go to live their lives away from the noise of Tel Aviv or the political pressure of Jerusalem. On the afternoon of March 1st, that city became the deadliest single location in this war. An Iranian ballistic missile carrying a half-ton warhead completed its flight path and made direct impact on a residential neighborhood in the Ramat Beit Shemesh district. The blast did not just destroy what it hit above ground, it punched downward through the concrete foundation of the synagogue above it, and collapsed the public bomb shelter that had been built specifically underneath that synagogue to protect the community when exactly this kind of attack happens. Magen David Adom declared 8 deaths at the scene. A 9th victim, a man named Gabriel Baruch Ravach, died shortly after at Shari Zedek Medical Center in Jerusalem. More than 40 people were injured in total. 28 were taken to hospitals, 2 were in critical condition, at least 4 apartment buildings in the surrounding area were destroyed or rendered completely uninhabitable, up to 11 people were initially listed as missing as rescue crews moved through the rubble, the 9 victims were named, and those names matter because this is not an abstract casualty figure in a conflict summary. These are people. Yaakov Beaton, 16 years old, his sister Abigail Beaton, 15 years old, their younger sister Sarah Beaton, 13 years old, 3 siblings from the same family, killed together in the same moment. Ronit Elimelech was 45 years old and a volunteer with United Hatzalah, Israel's emergency medical service. When paramedics arrived at the scene and started sorting through the debris, they found her medical kit and her volunteer vest buried in the rubble alongside her. Ronit had brought her 3 children to visit her parents in Beit Shemesh that afternoon. When the sirens went off, the whole family went into the shelter together. Ronit was killed. Her mother, Sarah Elimelech, was killed beside her. 2 of Ronit's children were pulled from the rubble alive and taken to hospital with moderate injuries. The 3rd survived. Also killed in the shelter were Beria Cohen and her adult son Yosef Cohen and Oren Katz. 9 people. 3 families, each losing more than 1 member in the same strike. There is one image from that scene that tells you more than any casualty list can. A local resident named Yaakov was sitting outside in the street when journalists arrived. His house had been destroyed. An IDF soldier came running up, and turned out to be his own daughter, who had heard about the strike and rushed to the scene looking for her parents. She sat her father on a bench and disappeared into the rubble to search. A paramedic quietly told a journalist that the man's wife had most likely been killed, and that they were waiting for a trauma specialist to arrive before telling him. That is what a half-ton warhead does to a neighborhood. Not just structures, families, entire constellations of people. Gone. Now let us talk about why the missile got through, because this is where things get complicated. And the answer reveals something important, not just about what happened in Beit Shemesh, but about the structural vulnerabilities in Israel's defense architecture that nobody in a position of authority wants to discuss publicly. Israel has the most sophisticated layered civilian missile defense system ever built. Arrow 3 handles long-range ballistic missiles at high altitude outside the atmosphere. Arrow 2 engages threats inside the atmosphere at medium altitudes. David's Sling handles medium-range ballistic and cruise missiles. Iron Dome covers short-range rockets, artillery, and mortars. These systems work together in layers. On most days, they work extraordinarily well. The IDF has claimed interception rates above 90% for ballistic threats throughout this conflict. But on the afternoon of March 1st, the system failed for 9 people in a shelter in Beit Shemesh, and the reason it failed is more troubling than a simple technical malfunction. Israeli officials confirmed that several interceptors were launched at the incoming missile. But senior IDF officials later revealed something that has not been widely reported. The Arrow system, the interceptor with the highest success rate against ballistic threats, was not deployed against the missile that killed those 9 people. A lower-tier interceptor was used instead, and it missed. The IDF stressed there is no official policy to ration interceptors, but the context surrounding that decision, or that failure of decision-making, explains itself when you look at what was happening around it. The attack on Beit Shemesh came during one of the heaviest Iranian missile barrages of the entire conflict. Military observers described the volume and pace of incoming threats that day as more intense than anything seen during the 12-day confrontation in June 2025. When your interception resources are stretched across dozens of simultaneous incoming threats, decisions get made in seconds. Some missiles get Arrow. Some missiles get a lower-tier system. And sometimes the wrong call gets made at the worst possible moment. An IDF official said it plainly, "The air defense array has achieved very high interception rates, but the defense is not hermetic. A direct hit can penetrate. This underscores the need to address the surface-to-surface missile threat. It is a real existential threat." That last sentence, existential threat, is not a phrase Israeli military officials use lightly. And they used it about a missile that killed a 13-year-old girl in a bomb shelter. Now here's the part of this conflict that is not getting nearly enough attention, because the failure to intercept the Beit Shemesh missile is one problem, but Iran has been doing something throughout this conflict that is specifically designed to make Israel's entire interception mathematics unsustainable. And it is working. According to IDF assessments and independent military analysts, approximately half of the ballistic missiles Iran has launched in this conflict carry warheads equipped with cluster submunitions. This is not an accident of inventory management. It is a deliberate tactical choice, one that Iran first publicly demonstrated in June 2025 and has now integrated as a central feature of its missile campaign. Here is how it works. A ballistic missile carrying cluster submunitions does not deliver one warhead to one impact point. As the missile approaches the target area, at high altitude, before any interception attempt can be made, the warhead separates and releases dozens to hundreds of smaller explosive devices called bomblets. These scatter across a wide area, sometimes spreading over a radius of up to 10 kilometers. Iran's Khorramshahr 4 variant, which has been used repeatedly in this conflict, can carry up to 80 individual bomblets per warhead. Now here's the problem that Israel's defense systems were not fully designed to solve. Israel's radar detects one incoming missile. It assigns interceptors to one trajectory and one projected impact point. But if that missile releases cluster submunitions before the intercept attempt engages it, the defenders suddenly face not one threat but dozens, or 80, spreading across a 10-kilometer residential area. Individual submunitions are too small, too fast, and too numerous for current systems to engage cost-effectively. An Iron Dome Tamir interceptor costs $40,000 to $50,000. An Arrow interceptor costs several $1 million. Against a wave of cluster bomblets spreading across 10 kilometers of residential streets, those cost ratios make comprehensive interception economically and logistically impossible. The result is predictable. Some submunitions reach the ground in populated areas regardless of how effective the larger interception effort is, and the casualties they produce are not concentrated at one impact point. They are scattered, unpredictable, and nearly impossible to fully protect against. In Yehud, just outside Tel Aviv, 2 workers were killed by submunitions from an Iranian cluster warhead that scattered across a residential and commercial area. 3 women at a beauty salon in Beit Awa, near Hebron, were killed when cluster munition fragments struck the building directly. A Thai agricultural worker at Moshav Adanim was killed by shrapnel from cluster submunitions that fell across an open agricultural field. None of these deaths were caused by a missile striking a military target. They were caused by the secondary debris field that cluster weapons are specifically designed to create, scattered indiscriminately across civilian areas where people work, shop, and grow food. Iran is not a signatory to the Convention on Cluster Munitions. the international agreement signed by 111 countries that bans the production, transfer, and use of these weapons precisely because of the indiscriminate civilian harm they cause. Iran does not recognize the agreement as binding on itself, and so it uses cluster munitions against Israeli residential neighborhoods, Gulf airports, and farming communities without any legal constraint. For Israeli military planners, this is not an abstract legal debate. It is an immediate operational nightmare with no clean solution. Intercepting missiles before they can release submunitions means engaging them at higher altitudes and longer ranges, technically harder, with a lower probability of success. Waiting until a missile is closer before attempting intercept reduces the engagement window and risks allowing cluster submunitions to release overpopulated areas anyway. Either approach accepts some probability that bomblets reach the ground among civilians, and the Beit Shemesh strike shows what happens when a full half-ton warhead, not just submunitions, but the entire primary weapon, reaches a residential neighborhood without being stopped. What makes the Beit Shemesh strike even harder to absorb is that it did not happen in isolation. It happened inside a conflict that, from the very first day, was never just about Israel. When Iran launched its retaliatory campaign on February 28th and March 1st, it did not aim exclusively at Israeli cities. It aimed at the entire region. The United States published a comprehensive official list of locations struck by Iranian missiles and drones since the conflict began. Read that list out loud and it sounds like a tour of the civilian infrastructure of the entire Middle East. Dubai International Airport, struck. Kuwait International Airport, struck multiple times, with a drone destroying radar systems on March 14th, and earlier hits damaging fuel storage and a passenger terminal. Abu Dhabi's Zayed International Airport, struck. Erbil International Airport in Iraq, struck. The Fairmont Palm Hotel in Dubai, struck. The Burj Al Arab Hotel in Dubai, struck. The Crown Plaza Hotel in Bahrain. The Port of Dubai. The Erez Towers residential complex in Bahrain. Residential areas in Qatar. Hotels, airports, residential towers, a synagogue with a shelter underneath it, all on the same official record, all hit within the same 4-week campaign. The scope of the economic damage is staggering. Oil has risen above $100 per barrel. Approximately 2,000 ships were trapped in the Persian Gulf due to the Strait of Hormuz disruption. Major international airlines suspended or drastically reduced flights to the entire region, citing both security risks and fuel shortages caused by strikes on energy infrastructure. Iran targeted the South Pars gas field in an early barrage, and Israeli and U.S. counterstrikes on Iranian energy infrastructure, including the South Pars facility and Karg Island oil installations, wiped out approximately 12% of Iran's total natural gas production in a single night. 92% of Iran's largest naval vessels have been destroyed. The IRGC Navy commander, Alireza Tangsiri, was killed in a strike at Bandar Abbas along with the IRGC Naval Intelligence Chief. The systematic elimination of Iran's military leadership has continued even through diplomatic backchannels and even through Trump's announced pause on energy strikes. The scale of destruction on both sides is unlike anything seen in the region since the Gulf War, and it is still ongoing. Iran cannot win this war in a conventional military sense. The United States has the most powerful air force ever assembled. Israel has one of the most sophisticated military establishments on Earth. Combined, they represent a force that Iran's conventional military has no realistic path to defeating in direct combat. Iran's military planners know this. They have known it for years. So Iran is not trying to win militarily. Iran is trying to make the cost of this war so high, so relentless, and so painful for every party involved that the political will to continue it eventually collapses. Think about what the last 4 weeks have produced from Iran's perspective. 9 civilians dead in a synagogue shelter in Israel. Dubai airport hit, the busiest aviation hub in the world. Qatar's LNG terminal damaged. Kuwait's airport struck 3 separate times. Oil above $100 a barrel. 2,000 ships trapped. Hundreds of thousands of tourists and business travelers stranded. Gulf economies absorbing damage to the trade infrastructure that funds their governments. Every single day this conflict continues, Iran is imposing an accumulated cost not just on Israel, but on the global economy, on Gulf Arab states that quietly back the U.S.-Israel operation, and on American political calculations heading into the 2026 midterms. The cluster munition tactic is part of that same strategy. Cluster bombs are not designed to destroy military infrastructure with precision. They are designed to spread lethal force across wide civilian areas. They are designed to make every neighborhood feel like a potential target. They force governments to spend enormous resources defending against threats too numerous and dispersed to fully intercept. And they create a psychological pressure on civilian populations that pure military analysis cannot fully capture. The cost ratio Iran is exploiting is brutal in its simplicity. An Iranian ballistic missile with a cluster warhead costs a fraction of what Israel and America spend intercepting it, and if even a small percentage of submunitions reach the ground in residential areas, the human cost imposed on the defending population far outweighs the economic cost Iran paid to create the threat. This is asymmetric warfare. Not on the battlefield, but in the ledger of political endurance. And it is working. Not in the sense that Iran is winning, Iran's military is being systematically dismantled, but in the sense that 9 people in a shelter in Beit Shemesh are dead, and their deaths are forcing conversations about whether this war can continue indefinitely without a negotiated exit. The IDF's Homefront Command Chief, Major General Shea Klepper, addressed the Beit Shemesh strike publicly and urged every Israeli citizen to continue using shelters and safe rooms. He framed the event as an extreme and rare scenario in which the shelter took a direct ballistic missile impact, not nearby blast pressure or shrapnel, which shelters are designed to absorb, but a direct, full-force hit from a half-ton warhead. He was careful to note that in the overwhelming majority of cases, shelters save lives, and the advice to use them remains correct. He is not wrong about the statistics. The majority of Israeli civilians who followed shelter protocols during the heaviest barrages survived because those protocols worked. Israel's layered defense has intercepted the overwhelming majority of incoming ballistic threats throughout this conflict. By day 10 of the war, the rate of Iranian missile and drone attacks had already dropped by more than 90% compared to the opening salvos, partly because of ongoing American and Israeli strikes against Iranian launch sites, storage facilities, and missile production infrastructure. But the families of 9 people who followed those same protocols and died anyway are not comforted by statistics. The gap between most cases and this case is not an abstraction when it is your 13-year-old daughter in the rubble. The Israeli government is now navigating one of the most difficult communications challenges any government can face in wartime. It cannot tell people that shelters are unsafe. That would create mass panic and potentially cause more deaths as people abandon protective protocols. It cannot tell people that shelters guarantee their safety, because Beit Shemesh proved they do not. It has to thread an impossible needle, urge continued use of a system that saves lives most of the time, while honestly acknowledging that direct ballistic missile impacts represent a threat no civilian shelter was designed to fully withstand. There is no clean message for that. There is only the reality of what happened in that shelter on March 1st, and the reality that sirens keep going off every single day. While all of this is happening on the ground, something is happening in the back rooms of international diplomacy that could change the entire trajectory of this conflict, or could fall apart completely within days. Pakistan has emerged as the central mediator between the United States and Iran. Pakistan's Prime Minister publicly confirmed his country's willingness to host direct talks between Washington and Tehran to end the war. And behind that public posture, the back channel is far more active than either side wants to officially acknowledge. Al Jazeera sources confirmed that Pakistan has already delivered a 15-point U.S. ceasefire proposal directly to Iranian officials. That plan reportedly includes a ceasefire framework under which both sides would engage in broader negotiations, covering a ban on Iranian uranium enrichment on Iranian soil and the full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping. Israel's Channel 12 reported details of the Trump proposal, including those 2 central demands. Iran has sent its own signals through the same channel. Iranian flag tankers were allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, a concrete, observable gesture that Iran is using to communicate a degree of willingness without making any public admissions. In the language of back-channel diplomacy, that kind of action speaks louder than official statements. Trump announced a 10-day pause on American strikes targeting Iranian energy infrastructure, a tangible concession offered specifically to create space for these negotiations. That pause costs something real in military pressure terms, and it was offered in the same period when 9 people were being buried in Beit Shemesh. The political weight of that timing is not lost on anyone involved. But Trump's energy strike pause has a deadline: April 6th. If the Pakistani channel does not produce concrete progress before that date, American strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure resume. Iran's incentive to signal through the strait evaporates, and the conflict moves into a phase that everyone involved has claimed they want to avoid, but that nobody has yet found a definitive way to prevent. There is also a visible tension within the U.S.-Israel coalition that the Beit Shemesh strike made more acute. Israel's stated military objective is several more weeks of strikes against Iranian military infrastructure before any ceasefire. America's stated diplomatic objective is creating space for negotiations before April 6th. Those timelines are in tension. The killing of IRGC Navy Commander Tangsiri and the IRGC Naval Intelligence Chief at Bandar Abbas came days after Trump announced his energy strike pause, demonstrating that Israel's campaign continues on its own schedule regardless of American diplomatic calculations. That tension is not new in this conflict, but every day it remains unresolved is another day of sirens. The human geography of what has happened in and around Beit Shemesh in the weeks since March 1st tells you something that political analysis alone cannot. More than 300 evacuees from the Ramat Beit Shemesh area were relocated to the Leonardo Plaza Hotel in Jerusalem on the night of the strike. Eventually, approximately 1,500 displaced residents spread across several hotels in the city. Government agencies set up coordination desks in hotel lobbies. Aid organizations brought supplies, and medical providers who began examining the evacuees discovered something they had